Добрий день всім.
Greetings. I guess that everything is fine and we can start. So my name is Arya Mora. I'm the representing the Advocacy and Communication Manager of the Ukrainian Legal Advisory Group, and today we are having the press conference, and the topic is the case of Viktoriia Roshchyna and how we can protect the rights of civilians illegally detained in the Russian Federation. A few technical issues I would like to clarify in the very beginning. So we will have simultaneous interpretation from Ukrainian into English and vice versa. So if you need and if you're listening to us in Ukrainian language and you cannot understand us, you can take the headset, the headpiece, and can hear the interpretation. Speaking of the structure of today's event and our agenda, we will start from a short introduction, and then we will discuss, we will have interventions from our speakers who are with us online and offline. And then we will have, I hope, enough time for the Q&A session, and we will try to also follow the comments in social networks for those who are watching us online. So please leave your reactions and comments. We will try to respond to all of them. So the reason why we decided to organize this event, and partially we will discuss the context, and that is and I will invite our colleagues to comment on this event. All of us have seen the news as of the 10th of October, when we started to get the messages about the death of Viktoriia Roshchyna in the Russian detention, and she was arrested in August 2023, and it seemed to us that that is a vivid and tragic example of what we have, that we have a big systematic problem related to a big number of people who are illegally arrested, illegally detained, and the other crimes related to these issues committed regarding these people. And in fact, we do not have the efficient mechanisms to return these people, and no punishment for these people who are committing crimes against these people. And even though we have initiatives working on this issue, and a bit later we will discuss it a bit, it's also important that the objective of this event is not to identify all the details of the last few weeks, because we understand that today we are lacking the information, and there is no proofs, no evidences, and therefore we would like to ask all of those who are in the audience to use the neutral terminology regarding the fact of death of Viktoriia Roshchyna and her state. Today, the father of Viktoriia Roshchyna and her relatives are listening to us, and I think that is going to be not correct regarding her relatives, and let's not speculate on this topic. And another thing I would like to say, maybe it's a bit unpleasant, but we are not planning to raise sensations. We are discussing the problem, which is quite well known for a long time, and luckily this topic is broadly discussed after the beginning of the full-scale war, mainly since the beginning of 2024, but nevertheless the systematics of these problems and lack of solutions is still in place, and therefore we can consider the situation of the case of Viktoriia Roshchyna and the broader context, because the worst crimes are not something single, is not a single occasion, something systematic. And therefore, the response should be systematic, both on the side of the government, of the civil society, and the other organizations. So, to begin with, I would like to invite Tetiana Katrychenko, who is representing Media Initiative for Human Rights. So that is an organization which is deeply researching the situation of the civilians in captivity. And Tetiana, could you give us a bit of the context? So what is happening and what are the results of your research and what are the potential challenges and solutions we can find here? Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to this important event. Since the beginning of the full-scale war, Media Initiative for Human Rights is talking about the detention of civilians all the time, and we started to do that since 2016 when our organization was established, because the Russian Federation, since the beginning of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, started to arrest, to detain on the temporary occupied territories and also on the territory of the Russian Federation. They started to detain Ukrainian civilians. In the beginning, these detention could last for a few days, and then after 2015, 2016, civilians on the temporary occupied territories, especially Luhanska and Donetska Oblast, which we were watching carefully, these people were detained for a long time, and some of them are still detained. Some of these civilians are still in detention on the temporary occupied territory of Luhanska Oblast, and some of them, they are sent to the territory of the Russian Federation, and they are kept in Rostov-na-Donu detention center. And the legal court proceedings are held against them. In the beginning of 2022, in the beginning of February 2022, we knew that about at least 300 detentions on the territory of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, and more than 150 on the territory of the temporary occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and later they were moved to the territory of the Russian Federation. And after this number has grown, and our organization has approximate number of the civilians detained after the full-scale war, and we can say that it's at least 1,880 people. And that is that is the list we have, and these people are divided in by oblasts, and we were talking about oblasts, which are luckily not under occupation, especially the northern oblast. In this case, the number of the civilians in detention, it cannot grow. We can just study the cases which are already there. For example, in Kyivsk Oblast, at least, and brought to the territory of the Russian Federation, as of now, at least 250 people were detained and later brought to the Russian Federation. In Chernihivsk and Sumska Oblast, the number is smaller, but nevertheless, they are kept in the Russian Federation. And we can even say that all of these civilians are from northern oblasts. They do not have the special status on the territory of the Russian Federation, meaning that they do not have any kind of so there are no explanations why they're there. If we're talking about southern areas, then Zaporizhska, Khersonska, and partially Mykolaievska and Kharkivska, eastern oblast. In this case, the detention process is ongoing, and maybe while we are talking at the moment, someone is being detained in Melitopol, Berdyansk, or in the other town. And that is the reason why it is very difficult to tell the final numbers, but nevertheless the number is huge, and that is a huge problem we're discussing. As Aria has said for a long time, it's not a new for us, but for the international community, for many of our partners, this situation is not well studied. What else is important? We can say that our organization also has the investigation on the detention of the civilians. On the example of the northern areas, it is easier to study them because we have the access to the former detention centers, and we also have the access to witnesses, and we can say that it was a full-scale operation of the Russian Federation, and it was a systematic operation. which was politically motivated. And in fact, all of these three indicators, that is, indicators of the crime against humanity, that the Russian Federation is committing this crime against civilians. And when we are talking about the other oblasts, eastern and southern, we understand how this policy is in fact systematic, and how, and that it is typical because the procedures are similar all around Ukraine. There are various people who are kept in detention. We can say that there are activists, meaning that there are those people who were against occupation. There are people who were not that active for the observer. For the third party observer, but they were not that active, but they were supporting the security sector of Ukraine. Also, there are journalists who were detained, and also media representatives, the people who are not journalists by their profession, but they had the connections to some of Ukrainian media, and also they were the people who were conducting informational resistance, because informational resistance is typical for the temporary occupied territories, not only now after the full-scale war, but it was also typical before that. For example, in Donetsk, a few civilians were detained who in fact really believed that nothing will happen to them. They had their social networks where they were informing that what is happening in the occupied Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, and they were accused of being spies and some of the other accusations which are difficult to explain now. The same thing is happening in the south and in the east, and we can see that the administrators of Telegram channels are detained who are explaining what is happening, and we can see that the Dmytro Khyluk, journalist, was detained, and also we know about Viktoriia Roshchyna, who in fact was a journalist, and her activity was related to informing people what is happening on the temporary occupied territories. So briefly, that is the context. Thank you very much. I think that it's really important to remember these kind of obvious things, but nevertheless, not always we remember about them when we are looking for solutions, or when we are raising this question on the level of stakeholders. And that is the problem of illegal detention of civilians of various categories, and the crimes which are committed in the course of these actions. And that is a problem which exists and existed even before the full-scale war. And in fact, even though some efforts are undertaken, and we can say that they are quite intensive recently on the return of civilians and their rights protection, nevertheless, we can see that we lack systematical approach and the understanding of the efficient solutions, because the Russian Federation does not help us anyhow, and they do not behave well with civilians they detain. And also we can say the same about the return and repatriation of the civilians, because these kind of procedures are well described, but nevertheless they are not happening in reality. And the thing, and now I would like to invite Yevgenia Kopalkina. She is the lawyer of our organization who represents the interests of the father of Viktoriia and Viktoriia's father. So I have the question regarding, beside the questions you... so how do you perceive this process from the side of the victim of this crime, and what kind of problems maybe, or difficulties? Maybe there are some solutions, or at least some key things we have to draw attention to. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank on behalf of the Roshchyna family and those who are the part of this process and who support her family in the case of returning Viktoriia Roshchyna, and also my words of support to the people whose relatives suffered in the similar situations and who do not know where their relatives are, and I wish you to return your relatives as soon as possible. Speaking of this case, I was thinking how it is better to explain it on the well-known facts which I'm allowed by the family to inform you about. When the Russian Federation has started the full-scale war on the territory of Ukraine in 2022, their activity was also related to the fact that they have amended their criminal code, and they have expanded the mandate of their law enforcement by quite a significant functionality, both on the temporary occupied territories and also in the framework of the waters of the Russian Federation. And therefore the crimes like spy, national treason, and also the resistance to the special operation, that's the way how they call the war in Ukraine, and that allows them to detain without any kind of accusation, without any kind of court proceedings, any kind of person who, in their opinion, can cause some risk to the Russian Federation and the regime. And as these facts are quite massive, and the activity of Viktoriia Roshchyna was related to covering these kind of violations, Viktoriia went on to the temporary occupied territories to cover these facts. And she became one of those who were the victim of this machine of crime machine of the Russian Federation. And till May, actually till the end of April 2024, the fact that she is detained by the Russian Federation was not in place, and by that time we had no information about that. All the time we made the request by the father. Father was requesting the Russian Federation about her that is a Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, which in fact is the National Informational Bureau, according to the Geneva Treaty on the confirmation of the facts of the detention of civilians and militaries, and they are the ones who are passing the information to the Ukrainian side, but these sources are quite limited, and this information is passed not always in timely manner, and they are not identifying all the victims. And we were quite limited in information, and we didn't have information, the answers according to the official request of the family, and all of these lasted for quite a long time, and until now all of these indicates that the family is in very ambiguous situation, and we can compare that to tortures, because not knowing the fate of their member of the family, it also affects their psycho-emotional state, and it leads to impossibility to help them in justified ways and to use any kind of mechanisms to obtain the relevant information, at least confirmation on the facts which were announced and stated by the Russian Federation, but actually not even stated, but sent by letter without any kind of justification and any kind of information to prove the information which they sent in the letter, which the father received on the 10th of October. It is also well known, and we can prove it with the father's approval. In the end of October, there was a call that the parents were allowed to talk to their daughter. And indeed, this dialogue happened, and Viktoriia was full of energy. So she has proved that she was promised to be released in September, and her family confirmed that, yes, be strong, there should be an exchange. But as we can see, in September exchange, she was not a part of this group. And what happens with her from the end of September and up till now, we do not know what has happened. And we know since the beginning of August, her traces are lost, and we do not know where is she now. And also, we do not know whether the negotiation group knows that, and therefore, all of these things do not simplify the course of action, because what should have happened in September didn't happen. Separately, I would like to say that we have to differentiate the negotiations process and the investigation, because these processes, they go in parallel. In some cases, they can cross, because the information obtained in the course of each of the processes can be beneficial for the other process. Besides that, the support of the international community is important, which had the request, the demands towards the Russian Federation to state the official information regarding the letter which was received by the father, whether that's an official letter, whether it proves the information which was received, and to see what are their next steps regarding the situation. So that are the key aspects, and maybe something else is okay. Thank you. Thank you, Evgenia. I think that what you were mentioning in the end regarding various mechanisms which can help to protect those who are in detention and their rights to return, and their rights, the rights of their relatives. The process, these processes should go side by side, but nevertheless they are the part of the general picture, and therefore our organization represents the victims, as you can understand, from the worst war crimes, but we are also working a lot, and we are trying to help the system with our efforts and thanks to the international expertise to become more efficient and to provide the efficient justice on both national and international level. And we have to understand that the state of the legal framework and the fact that Tetiana has already mentioned, these crimes can be qualified as crimes against humanity. But up until now, only now the President of Ukraine has signed the law on the implementation of the provisions on the Rome Statute, and that is just the beginning of this way. Most likely, all of these changes will not have the retrospective force, so they will not be applied to the events happening before this law, and therefore many of these, and therefore we cannot qualify properly these events, and the justice will not be full. It doesn't mean that the justice will not be in place, but we need to consider the gaps and look for the ways to close them. One of the ways here is not the remedy, but considering the size of these crimes, the scale of these crimes, we hope that the International Court will consider this case and will work on the prosecution, detention of the civilians, and all the crimes which are happening to them in detention. And from time to time, we can see that even if there are, for example, interim decisions, solutions, for example, the rest, they are helping to improve the processes of return. There are no guarantees here, but nevertheless, doing nothing is worse than doing something. And in this way, we are trying to improve the situation. So, and here I would like to, even though it is really a question which is about civilians and their detention, it is also important to say that Viktoriia is the representative of the journalist community. She was doing her job, and that is a protected group. And creating obstacles for the journalists is illegal. Namely, the fact that Viktoriia was the active participant on the journalist community, this fact has helped because media community was actively engaged in the advocacy of her rights, of the identification of her situation. And I would like to invite Sevhil Musaieva, Ukrainian Pravda. She is online with us. Can you share your thoughts on the situation and the peculiarities of this situation and the context of those who are illegally detained in the Russian Federation? What are the challenges and the ways to improve the situation, both on national and international level? Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join today to this great discussion. Indeed, this topic is very important, and I would like to start with a well-known facts. And it was well articulated by the Committee of the Journalist Protection that detaining journalists is a crime. That is the main thing which we have to consider when we're talking about Viktoriia Roshchyna's case, because she was a freelancer of Ukrainian Pravda and the other Ukrainian media. She was legally, absolutely legally doing her job, and she considered her mission to tell about what Ukrainians are facing on the temporarily occupied territories. She considered that to be important. She considered that she has to do that, even despite all the difficulties of this job, even despite all the risks. She considered that to be a mission, and the mission is the most important thing we have to remember, we have to mention when we are talking about Viktoriia, when she was doing these important, extremely important topics about violation of the humanitarian law, about deportation of children, about the road of life, and all of these things are extremely valuable evidences of what the people on the temporarily occupied territories are facing. What I would like to mention regarding the case of Viktoriia Roshchyna, of course, that is her status. That is a status which is called the international lawyers are called communicators. So since her disappearance on the temporary occupation in August 2023 till spring 2024, her lawyers, her family, international organizations didn't know where is she, because the Russian Federation was ignoring absolutely all the requests which were sent. They were not approving them, and they were not approving the detention. At the same time, they were not mentioning any kind of accusation. So indeed it was unclear what has happened back in August 2023, and I know how important all the efforts were of the efforts of their colleagues and the lawyers' efforts. How many efforts were made to get the information where Viktoriia is? So we found out about it after the first exchange, which happened in March 2024, but at least the Russian Federation proved the detention. Once again, why it is important to mention all of these things? Because Viktoriia didn't have the opportunity to get the legal assistance, the legal services when she was detained. She didn't have the access to the international organizations. So the international organizations also didn't know what is happening to her. What are the conditions of her detention, and whether she gets, for example, medical assistance, or maybe she gets at least some basic needs. So what does she eat? So she didn't have the right to write the letters, and that is an important an important thing to keep the person in the good psychological state in detention, and that is a violation of all the rights. And I think that Viktoriia's case is that status incommunicada is and we do not know how many people with this status are in the detention centers on the temporary occupied territories and on the territory of the Russian Federation. Speaking of the temporary occupied territories, the difficulty was, as far as we understood, after Viktoriia was moved to the territory of the Russian Federation, her status appeared that she is detained. Before that, we didn't know what was happening. So just imagine how many Ukrainians are kept with this status in the Russian prisons. And separately from that, I would like to say that Ukrainian media representatives, and I know that as of now, 28 Ukrainian representatives are in the Russian prisons. Some of them are detained in the beginning of the full-scale war. For example, my colleague Dmytro Khyluk, and also the accusations were not clear because no official accusations were made. And I would like to mention also Anastasia Fukhovska, who is also in detention, who was arrested, he was detained in Melitopol, and now she's on the territory of the Russian Federation. So we have to raise these questions, and we have to engage more international organizations for them to understand the importance of releasing these people. And I would like to say that Sevhil, they have to be released because they are illegally kept there, and the prison, it's not the status of the prisoners of war, and we cannot talk about exchange. And we can see that we are saying that these people have to be released. And believe me, we are talking not about even dozens of people, but there are thousands and tens of dozens of people. And there are women. They are in horrible conditions, and I do understand that because I'm talking to the lawyers, and I hope that Viktoriia's case will make it possible to raise this question, to explain that the international organizations have to have the access to the civilians in detention, prisoners, civilian detention, the Red Cross, the international organization, the journalist organizations have to fight for the release of the Ukrainian journalists. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, it's very important what you've mentioned regarding the release of these people, the release of civilians in detention, and we quite obviously see that the Russian Federation is trying to use these civilians they have arrested as, the exchange pool, and they are trying to capitalize the situation. That is also the violation of the international humanitarian law, and that shows that the situation with the release and return of the civilians, as well as bringing to justice the Russian Federation and everything that happens in between, that happens during this time. All of these is very difficult. This fiber is very politicized, and even we can see that even if the releases are happening, even though it should have happened, they are happening through the third countries and various political, and we can see that even there we can see some politicization. So we can name it in this way, but it's important to return it to this context. That we do not know the number of civilians because we are limited in information, and The first obligation we have, and the country, the state is the one who has to fight this problem, and that is a very difficult task. And we know that the coordination headquarters on the work with the POVs works also on the issue of civilians, and mainly we understand that. And here, from the point of view of infrastructure and the solutions in place, maybe there are some kind of challenges. Maybe there are some ways to improve the process and to improve cooperation, because we understand that even the process of negotiations is very difficult and lots of factors impact it. And sometimes some separate a discussion of some detention of some separate people helps to release them, and sometimes the facts of publishing the information about some people can help and is important part of cooperation between media, investigators, the state, and civil society. And sometimes this coordination is not in place, or sometimes this information can be published in advance. And I would like to invite Viktoriia Petruk for you to comment. As a representative of the coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war, what are your challenges? And what do you think about the landscape? And what are the ways to improve the coordination and the new approaches to return civilians, or in some other way to protect their rights? Please, the floor is yours. Thank you. As it was said in the beginning, no sensations are not going to happen. I'm not going to tell anything which has to be secret. And first of all, I'm talking about negotiations, which of course this process like silence, and it is a very delicate process. Yes, indeed. Coordination headquarters in February 2024 got the new authority to work with the civilians, and more than 100 people were detained before we got this more than 100 people were returned before we got this mandate, thanks to our work. And of course, I can agree with everything which was said. A huge part of the work, especially when on returning the civilians who are the victims of illegal detention, is a coordination between various authorities which are somehow related to the issues of the civilians returning. That is Office of Ombudsman, that is our work, that is the work of the Joint Office in the State Security Service. And in the framework of the August exchange, some civilians were returned, and a very well-known Ilya Umerov. That's thanks to our joint efforts. And a few more things. Why it is so difficult? Because the war is ongoing and we still have the enemy who doesn't want to make our life easier. The responsibility for non-returning the civilians who, it seems to be, they have to be released, and the responsibility for their detention, for lack of communication, for violation the provisions of the Geneva Convention, all of these is the fault of the Russian Federation. And indeed, we can prove that on the temporary occupied territories and also on the territory of the Russian Federation, people are kept in not in the proper conditions, incommunicado, and they do not get the legal services, and they are tortured. If we're talking about whether there is a special treatment of the civilians kept by the Russian Federation comparing to the POVs, no, there is nothing. They are kept in the same conditions, and all of them are insufficient. What do we do as a state? First of all, we are negotiating the returning of the civilians. Besides that, we're doing a lot on the international stage, because without the external support, we cannot return all of our civilians back to Ukraine. And we As you know, we are implementing Provision 4 of the peace formula of Zelensky, and that is returning civilians, because one of the topics during the conference was returning civilians, and this topic will be discussed in Canada in the end of October. There is going to be a very big block of topics, and civilians will be also discussed. Beside that, as an example of our work, that is also the adoption of the resolution. So the adoption of this resolution is the joint efforts of our joint forces, and that is just one of the many documents. So the increasing legal pressure, the communicating on the problems of civilians, it will help our work. I would like to separately thank the organizations which are helping us to identify the information about all the people, about their disappearance, of the people we know, because the unified list, the unified register of the civilians detained by the Russian Federation is at most important in the procedure of the return. Because if we're talking about returning someone, we have to understand who are we talking about. Thank you. Thank you very much, Viktoriia. And it seems to me that indeed that is a very important context, that the efforts related to returning the civilians who are kept illegally in the Russian Federation, that is a topic of a coordinated system. It's not happening in vacuum. It's not happening. It's not one authority which is responsible for that, or one person responsible for that. And it means that we need, all of us, and by the way, that is one of the reasons why we wanted to have this discussion. So we would like to underline this. So we have to consider what are the ways to improve this process, not in the separate cases, not when we are speaking about some separate authorities, but what can we do systematically? Because everyone is interrelated, something that I was mentioning in the beginning before Viktoriia was commenting. And after your words, I think it's obvious that each piece of this puzzle can have a positive and also negative impact. And therefore, resolving this issue and the way to find the solution, as well as the ministry conference in Canada, that is when we have to question what is our lens, what is our angle to observe this situation. And it seems that, and also inside our country, when we are making requests, and also our international partners have to perceive that as a system. Both when we are talking about legal framework, about support of the victims, because the information is lacking. What kind of tools do we need to support them? What are the ways to rehabilitate these people? What are the ways to bring to justice? So, of course, we cannot discuss everything during this briefing, but that is an invitation for the further discussion, for the deeper discussion, because all of these will be continued. The work will be ongoing. And in this context, this problem, first of all, appeared not just after the full-scale war, and also it is related to many. It's something that is something that is relevant for many people. And I would like to invite for the word Valery Matyushenko. Valery Matyushenko was in detention. I think that you can tell actually more about your experience in the Russian Federation, even before the full-scale war, and you were released this year. And many things from your experience. Our lawyer represents Valery's case, and this experience, in my opinion, can help us to find the new angle to see this problem in a systematic way. So, Valery, any kind of your reflections, any kind of your observations on what the previous speaker said, and your experience as both during the detention and after detention, when you were trying to restore your rights, we will really appreciate your comments. Greetings. So first of all, I'd like to say that I got in detention in 2017, and they just came to my home. I was outside. They put on a bag on my head, bracelets on the handcuffs of my hands, and they brought to detention centers. Well, the conditions of this isolation were horrible, that were tortures. You didn't have any kind of rights. They could come to you so at 3 a.m., for example, my personal experience, and they start interrogating you, and after that they start beating you, and then they start to torture you with electricity, no medical checks. And you're constantly under the psychological pressure. And when you hear that somewhere at night someone is tortured and someone is screaming, we had 20 people in our room, and everyone started to sing. Everyone stands up and they start singing, for example, Katyusha or the Russian anthem. And you're singing until the tortures are not over. You're singing and singing, and the song is over. And then you're forced to sing it again. And that was a constant isolation. We were forced to... There was a labor exploitation, and later I was brought to the detention center. In detention centers, the attitude was very bad, and one person had tuberculosis, and this person died, and the body was brought out, and then another person was brought in without any kind of disinfection, and then another person was brought to this chamber, and that was in the beginning of June when I was brought to colony number 32 in Makiyevka town in Donetsk Oblast, and the food there was so to say the trash. That was water, 1 potato, no medical checks. And in 4 years, I have never had any kind of X-ray. And that is also an indicator. Then, if you have political accusation, the attitude is very different from those who committed crimes. I've seen it myself with my own eyes when I was sent to barracks with the ordinary prisoners, and not political. And I've seen that the guards are even talking to those people, and they are talking in the other way, not like with the political prisoners. So, for a small violation, you are sent to the pit, that is the punishment isolator, and you are sent there for 15 days and nights. You do not have any rights because you're no one there. Thank you. It seems to me that it's an important example that shows that I'm talking a lot about isolation, what is happening, that the crimes are not followed up, but quite often we are not able to visualize it or to understand what is it indeed. And it is important to understand that people who were illegally detained and their experience, those civilians who were detained by the Russian Federation in war, it includes many different international worst crimes. And when we are working on the justice for these crimes, it's important for the mechanism we are using, for example, the national system of national justice system or the international too. They have to consider this complex approach, because it can turn out that institutionally, or because we as a society, we are focused on one crimes and on the others, on some certain experiences, in the end it actually happens to the victims, and later they have to prove, with the help of their representatives who work with them, or unfortunately sometimes separately, they have to explain how systematic is this problem. The same thing regarding the investigations and focus groups we're working with. So when we're talking about detention of civilians and crimes committed in the course of these situations, it's not about a person who is torturing this person or who have detained the person sent later. We are typically talking about the system. And when we are looking for those who have to be punished, we have to look further than the executors, because when we're talking about the international legislation, when we are trying to understand the situation broader and to get higher on this command chain, in this case, we are able to protect more people and to reflect their experience in this process. Well, again, just a few words. If you feel more comfortable to return to the audience, depends on you. And here, I think that one of the most important things, that is something we started with when Tetiana was giving us a general situation, and now we're returning here from the point of view of international organizations, and I would like to invite Tetiana Katrychenko. I hope that you can hear me.
Yeah, cool. Власне,
So Miss Mariana is the special reporter on the crimes of human rights violations in the Russian Federation, and she is researching on this, and also she is talking about the people detained. And it's important when we are talking even about on this level, when there are institutions which have less capability, less capacity, and which have no impact to release all the civilians. And we can see that this is a multi-level, a multi-stage process, and the situation and how it is happening on the national, international level, that is also very important. And here I would like to invite Ms. Mariana to comment on what we've heard before, and to share her personal observations on how, both on Viktoriia Roshchyna's case and also on the objective of your work. Thank you.
I can speak in English or I can speak.
Yes, you can.
поэтому могу и по-русски. Что будет
English.
украински, к сожалению, не говорю.
English.
Is fine. Yeah, English is fine. We have simultaneous interpretation. So yeah, that would be just great. Thank you.
All right then. First of all, I would like to turn to the parents of Viktoriia Roshchyna and to say how much our hearts, our minds go with them in these difficult times, because what they are subjected to is also equal to torture and ill treatment. Receiving two messages over a year time, the first one that Viktoriia is detained in the Russian Federation, but no details of where she was detained, under what circumstances, what charges, why. And the second one, after so many requests from the lawyer, from the family, from Evgenia, from your organization, who is representing the family, for any clarity, for any news from their daughter, and to receive such a disturbing news that actually Viktoriia died on 19th of September. I think it's a very cynical and very it is a method of torture, and this time against the parents of Viktoriia, as many other thousands of Ukrainian civilians are trying to get news of their loved ones who are in Russian detention. And they're receiving similar messages or no messages at all. As a special rapporteur for the United Nations on human rights in the Russian Federation, I took office on 1st of May last year. I have been in this post, that's the first ever such mandate that the government of the United Nations created in a very difficult way. But finally it was created precisely to monitor what's happening in the Russian Federation, what violations of human rights for everybody who is within the official borders of Russia. However, as from the first day I took office, I've been saying it's vital to understand Russia today. It's vital to acknowledge the link between repression at home, repression against the anti-war critics, against the human rights defenders, against the journalists, and the aggression abroad, the aggression against the Ukrainian people. And these are inseparable. They're perpetrated by the same officers, by the same politicians, by the same leaders of the government that are giving the criminal orders to torture, to disappear, to kill human rights defenders, journalists, civilians from Ukraine, but also within the Russian Federation. Anybody who dare speak against the war of aggression against Ukraine. Today, from Geneva, I'm at the moment very early in the morning in Washington, D.C. I'm in United States because I'm here to present my second report this year to the UN General Assembly. This report is on torture in the Russian Federation. And I was listening to the gentleman, the torture survivor who just spoke. And yes, all these torture methods that the Russian Federation government has deployed against its own people in the Russian prisons, in the Russian police custody, they have been even becoming more widespread and systematic against the Ukrainian civilians, against the Ukrainian POWs who have been deported to either forcibly transferred within the occupied territories of Ukraine or deported like Viktoriia to the Russian Federation, put in prison, most of the civilians kept incommunicado, as it was mentioned by the other speakers, which means cut off from any communication with the outside world, with their families, no access to a lawyer. In the case of Viktoriia, she wasn't even charged. They were keeping her completely illegally and completely in violation of variety of international law, from humanitarian law to human rights law. But the point is, why are they doing this? And I was wondering how low a government authorities could sink when I don't think there is a lowest point than opening a war against the truth and opening a war against the messengers of the truth, which are the journalists, the media workers. When a government, even in a war situation, starts targeting the journalists and the media workers, the human rights defenders, but particularly the ones that are there to inform us about the truth, the journalists, the reporters. I think this is the lowest point, and it also shows how this government is actually extremely disintegrated from any high moral values or values of international law or human rights. What happened to Viktoriia is not only a war crime, it's a violation which needs to be prosecuted by all possible and dealt with by all possible international mechanisms, to begin with the national mechanisms of Ukraine. But very importantly, the Russian government has immediately to reveal and confirm the news about Viktoriia's fate, whereabouts. We published today, I initiated a statement which we published from the United Nations and I invited colleagues of mine, special rapporteurs of the United Nations, and we published this statement. I sent it to Evgenia. Evgenia could, hopefully, Evgenia, please send it to the family of Viktoriia, but also to your colleagues. We're asking today, we're insisting, we're demanding for immediate information and confirmation by the Russian authorities. Where is Viktoriia Roshchyna? We're also demanding, if it's confirmed that she has died, which is not a certain, it's not for sure because they haven't really come up with any details. But in case it's true, they have to immediately provide the body, Viktoriia, which needs to return home, in order for an independent investigation to take place, including independent autopsy. We need to know the truth of the fate of Viktoriia. But I'm still hoping that the message signed by some gentleman called Koch, without even military titles, allegedly, he is from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. He's been signing the first and the second message to the family of Viktoriia. I'm still hoping that this is part of the cynical plan of just tormenting the parents and the families of the detainees, and that it's not true, that Viktoriia is still alive, that she's somewhere, like we had with many of the political prisoners in Russia who have been taken to Siberia, to beyond the Arctic Circle. They've been kept hidden, incommunicado, similarly to the Ukrainian deported civilians and POWs as well, and the children, the deported Ukrainian children in the Russian Federation. I also want to say that it's important now to realize international justice takes time. Yes, the International Criminal Court, yes, I think we should and you should appeal to the mechanisms of the United Nations, also for Ukraine, the European Court for Human Rights, after the national system in Ukraine, the national judicial system is exhausted. But I think it's very important that we have a very practical, very urgent approach to the situation with Ukrainian deported civilians and detainees in general, including the POWs, but first and foremost, the civilians. I'm here meeting, and today actually I'm going to the White House. And yesterday I had meetings at the US State Department, and that's only one government I'm talking to, but I'm talking to all governments of the international community. And I'm asking them to have a special plan for the Ukrainian deported civilians who have to be immediately released and they have to return. They are not, as I heard from my limited Ukrainian, обменный фонд. They're not for exchange. They have to be immediately released by the Russian Federation, and the first step has to be to give the lists of who are these civilians, where are they kept, under what circumstances. They have to be taken out of this incommunicado, this status of enforced disappearance, and shown first and foremost to their families, then to the world, and go back home. There are, I think, various ideas. I think you, as civil society in Ukraine, have to also appeal to your government. I understand that the Ukrainian authorities are not willing, and rightly so, to be receiving civilians in exchange for POWs, but sometimes in history, we have to come out of our comfort zone in the name of saving lives, in the name of human rights. And I think that it's when we deal with the Russian authorities, who are not listening to anybody and are continuing to subject to despicable forms of torture the Russian political prisoners and the Ukrainian deported detainees in Russia. I think we need to appeal to the governments that could listen. The Ukrainian government should be lobbied by you as a civil society, that there should be a special mechanism for the return of the Ukrainian civilian detainees. I think the international community have to establish this process. Whether it should be, they should not shy away from demanding from the Russian authorities in their communication, confidential or not, in any negotiations that they're having with the Russian government, and in the future peace negotiations, because one day this war has to end, this war of aggression, and there will be peace talks, there will be peace plan. And I think as a first point, there are 2 points that I'm asking from governments to secure in these peace negotiations. One, that all the Ukrainian detainees go back home, including the children, the deported children, the civilians, and the POWs. And the second point, in parallel, I'm not putting them one first or second, is the Russian political prisoners, the brave Russian human rights activists, anti-war critics, who also paid the price for being against the war. A poet was raped by 3 police officers at detention because he wrote a poem against the war. Then he received 7 years in prison. And I could go on and on. But similarly, the Ukrainian detainees are subjected to sexual violence, to torture with electric shocks. And these torture methods have cheerful and cynical names. The torture method with electric shocks, which the survivor was describing, is called, and it's connected to the sensitive parts of the body, including the genitals. It's called a call to a friend or a call to Putin. I think the paquet, the plastic bag over his head before being taken to Izolyatsiya, the sinister torture place in Donetsk, which actually I have visited before it became a torture place in 2014. The plastic bag over the head and similar torture with gas mask is called Little Elephant, and so forth and so forth. Even the names that the Russian authorities and prison guards and police is using while torturing people, calling these names which are from the civilian life, and they're cheerful. They have nothing to do with the methods that they're applying onto the political prisoners in Russia and the Ukrainian detainees. So I think we need a plan, we need justice for Viktoriia, and we need the responsible to be brought to justice, and we need sanctions. And please, as a civil society of Ukraine, appeal to the international community. We need sanctions that are by name. These sanctions have to be on the torturers, on the ones who kidnap, and the ones who gave the criminal orders for journalists, for civilians to be kidnapped, deported to Russia, tortured, and in some cases killed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Дякуємо вам.
Thank you very much. I think that very important emphasis, because before we move to the Q&A session, first of all, that is the question of the systematic decisions which might need the establishment of the special institutions. And in the beginning of this year, we had a meeting of the newly established group, which the international group, the international platform on the return of the civilians, and that was initiated by the representatives of the Ukrainian government with many stakeholders. You can Google it, the international platform, and in fact we didn't hear that much about this platform after February 2024, and maybe it has to transform. Maybe in the framework of the ministry conference in Canada, there are some kind of works, and maybe the peace formula, something should be happening, but it has to be systematic, and as Ms. Magyana has said, it has to be with the plan, with a strategic objective, and that can also mean the establishment of new institutions on the return of civilians and also on the bringing to justice. And speaking of what we were discussing earlier about the gaps and the challenges national system faces and the limitations of the mechanism on this level, and the crimes which the victims who were illegally detained in the territory of the Russian Federation, it can be both hard on the national level, considering the national and legal limitations, and the international court maybe will not be able to cover all the cases, and we can understand that it's not the case, and we can see them on the example of the critical infrastructure. So at the moment, there is a certain time scope since October 2022 till February 2023, and only energy infrastructure, meaning that there are some certain limitations of the institutions which now have this mandate. And it doesn't mean that we have to prolongate the impossible or to do something that is impossible with the institution, but we have to think how to establish the system which will be sustainable. And if in the context we need the special mechanisms on the international level, maybe that was going to be the answer. And if the context of justice, we will need the special mechanism to bring to justice for the severest crimes, mainly the crimes against humanity. That can be also the answer. Our organization is studies the mechanism for a long time, and one of the recommendations which we are mentioning in our latest research on the legal system is the need to establish the mixed court, which will be able to prosecute for the crimes of the middle sides, which Ukraine might not be able to resolve, and which the international organization, institutions, because of their limitations, cannot cover. That is a question for a new discussion, but we are mainly talking about the approach, and this approach has to be comprehensive and consider all the challenges we have so far. And the last thing which is worth mentioning here is that we were trying to be very careful about this briefing, because we understand how sensitive it is, and mainly for the family of Viktoriia Roshchyna. And therefore, we were talking to the father of Viktoriia to clarify whether it is okay for him. And we really appreciate that they are listening to us today, and that they are in this process with us. And I think that the fact that in the process in the course of protection of your rights, you are not excluding yourself, and you're actively participating, and you're trying to protect your rights. So I'm saying trying because it is very difficult. I'm not a victim, and I'm not representing these victims. But even when I get the fraction, a very small piece of this information, I understand how difficult it is, and I cannot imagine how difficult it is for the people. And when we are researching, when we are trying to understand the preconditions, and for example, when we're talking about Viktoriia Roshchyna, when we are trying to establish system or improve the systems, the justice system, so it's important not to forget that we have to improve the work with the needs of these of the victims, because when we're talking about systematic problems, the key aspect can be lost, that we are doing it for the people who went through a horrible experience, for them to be able to overcome this experience and to get the justice they consider the most important, especially when we're talking about Viktoriia Roshchyna, and it is obviously public, and its media coverage is quite significant. It is important for us not to forget these things and to take in account what we are doing and how what consequences does it have for the course of this case, and for the family, and for the justice this family is striving for. So I would like to thank our speakers who joined us both online and in this audience for the expertise you've shared. And also I would like to thank all people who are online and offline with us. And let's move to the discussions and to the comments. I think that we will dedicate up to 15 minutes here during this meeting, and then if the colleagues will be ready, we can have the informal discussion. And that is also the opportunity for the panelists to add some small remarks which you would like to make. So are there any questions? Please raise your hands. We're going to answer them. Yes, please. Thank you. Anastasia Moskachova, Grate. I would like to ask regarding the justice in Viktoriia Roshchyna's case. There is a proceedings in Ukraine on her kidnapper. Do you know anything about that? Maybe people were identified. What can be told now? So at the moment, the investigation authorities are conducting the investigation in this matter, and also there is a separate proceeding on the letter on her death, and later these two proceedings are going to be united and they are going to be one case. So just in September, we found out about the place of her detention. And when we found it out, we lost the information where she was moved later. So we have the 8th of September, and after this date, we do not know what was happening to her. So this situation is unclear, and who is making control over Viktoriia. So, of course, we understand that the Russian Federation is responsible for it, because it's a systematic policy regarding what is happening with the civilians and how the rights of POV are violated. And we understand only the top of this iceberg. But nevertheless, when we consider some sector facts, and if we're talking about the lower level in this case, we can say that there is no certain information. Thank you very much. Maybe some other questions? Okay, so While the questions are being prepared, maybe someone of the speakers online or offline would like to give a comment. Maybe you have forgotten something, or maybe you want to reflect on the remarks of the other speakers. Well, I guess after many requests from both civilian and POVs who are still in detention from the families of the detained individuals, I would like to have attention. A lot of things were said that in the nearest month, we will have the meetings which we need to use to raise the question on the release of both civilians and deported people and also children. And we need to emphasize that the people who are on the occupied territories, the POVs, despite the fact that they have the immunity. For example, the international organizations' representatives who are in detention and they are detained for a long time, despite the fact that civilians have the false accusations for spying, for various criminal cases which are made by the Russian Federation and are incommunicado. They are in an at most vulnerable situation because the absence of the basic these things allow the Russian Federation to conduct the crimes against these people. So we need to emphasize these facts and these events, especially in the framework of the processes which are going to take place on the international platforms. Thank you. I would like to add also, we are talking a lot about the international level, about the meetings on the level of the ministers in Canada and the coalition of the states on the fulfillment of the first provision of the peace formula of Zelensky. And in our organization, we have three things which, in our opinion, would have been maybe not that easy, but it would have been easy to explain then to the international community. First of all, when we are talking about this coalition of the states regarding the first provision of the peace formula, it is important to say that that are not the political talks. These talks have to be filled with some certain sense to work on the real mechanisms on returning civilians from detention in the Russian Federation on the territory of the Russian Federation, because at the moment we see only meetings and negotiations, and according to our information, there are no practical steps. If we are not able to release all civilians at once, if the international community is just considering the situation, we have to help the civilians. And the second thing is that if the ICRC is not able to control and to provide the access to the detention centers, in this case, we have to look for the alternative ways to access these places, to understand the conditions. And for the tortures mentioned today about the back, about small elephants, so all of these tortures have to be impossible, because we understand that people are dying in Russian detention, not just because they are kept there, but because they are tortured. And we know that the working group we are talking about, it was established in February 2024. And since 2024, February, in the official body exchanges, quite a lot of bodies were returns of the POVs and civilians who died in detention centers on the territory of the Russian Federation. The third thing is that what we can do already, what the international community can do, to attend to the court proceedings on the territory of the Russian Federation in Rostovsky court, to see how everything is happening, to see these fake accusations. The Moscow court, where that is also a place where they can attend through the first step to fulfill not with the politics but with the census the real mechanism. The second is to provide the access to the alternative access, and the third one to attend the court proceedings to see what is happening with Ukrainians. And I think that is something we can do already today and to initiate it already today in the framework of this ministry conference. Thank you. Maybe there are some other questions. I can see the hand raised. So please press the mic. Greetings, Angelina Karyakin. I have the question to Ms. Viktoriia. If you have any kind of numbers, maybe I missed it in the beginning, what is the number of civilians we are talking about? The ones who we want to return from the detention, at least approximate numbers, and also the clarification, how many of them are kept on the territory of the Russian Federation and how many of them are kept on the temporary occupied territory? Thank you. So in the beginning we were saying that to assess at least some number on the temporary occupied territories or in the Russian Federation is quite difficult because every day, every minute, any person who is on the temporary occupied territories can become the victim of the detention, of the kidnapping and detention. And answering the second part of your question, the logics of the detention centers, the logics of the of this deportation is not clear. The detention centers are both on the temporary occupied Federation and in the Russian Federation, and therefore it's hard for me to say what is the ratio. So what I can say for sure is that when we are talking about the numbers, we have to understand that we can forget someone, and our cooperation with the families, with the other authorities which are collecting the information about the missed people and coordinate with international organizations. We want to know every name, every person, and every victim. Thank you. Are there any other questions, or maybe there are some remarks from the speakers? Maybe you would like to add something, or maybe some reflections? I can't see the hands. No questions. So I guess we can move to the end of our briefing. And indeed, it seems like our briefing will be over, and this topic was well covered this year, and in the context of the Viktoriia Roshchyna's case, a lot of attention is paid to this case. But considering the experience we've heard today, considering the context of the civilians in detention, at some point we lack information. There are lack of informational issues because, and we lack information because, and there is nothing to communicate. And in our opinion, it means that obviously it means that everything around these efforts to return people, the mechanisms, and bringing to justice these people, all of these things are long-term targets. And we as representatives of media, we have to keep focused on these things, even if it should be the long-term focus, and we should be in touch with the civil society and with state organization, and we can suggest, the only thing we can suggest is cooperation, because we are facing lots of technical aspects and problems and challenges, and I think that organizations which are present in this room MIPO, ULAG, and other organizations which are working on this topic, they would be really happy to cooperate and to have a dialogue on what should we pay attention to, where should we move. And the last thing, which is probably worth mentioning in the context of the problem which was mentioned by Tetiana, many of these institutions are limited in their mandates because of lack of cooperation and legal framework. But the way to find out the way how to return the civilians systematically is that we need to be honest about our baseline. If the institution will not have the access, we have to look for the ways out. We have to look for the tools presented by the international law and the diplomatic community gives us. But that is the reason why we have to be careful about these processes, both on the national level, because we understand that it's difficult for the state to manage this problem, and also on the international level, because otherwise we are going to make the circles and every new mechanism is going to be the same. It's willing to do something, but considering the fact that we have some illusions about the reality, it is impossible to do anything. So a very sad, fatalistic ending of the briefing. So thank you very much for visiting, attending this briefing. We are ready for the further communication, both online and offline. Have a nice day, and thank you very much for participating in our event. Thank you.